Hello everyone. In this video, the second of our series, I'd like to talk to you about the second half of Appendices B and C in your text in preparation for your quiz this week. So Appendix B, the first point they make at point number 7 is that flat adverbs, that is adverbs that don't end in ly, I think they give you the example of thus, for example, or what else do they get? Oh, doubtless, that's right, thus and doubtless. Those are adverbs in and of themselves. They don't end in ly, and you don't add an ly to them to make them something like more of an adverb than they are. So we don't say thusly or doubtlessly. You just say thus or doubtless. The same thing is true if you're using first, second, third, not in an adjectival sense. But if you're using them as adverbs, you do not add ly. Firstly, secondly, thirdly, if you're making a series of points. First, second, third will work just fine. In the same way that you don't change them if they're adjectives. This is the first time that I met with the boss, and that kind of thing. The eighth point is it's a little more complicated, a little more involved in that, and that is the matter if you have two independent clauses in a sentence. Let's take a sentence like this. Let's say Susan is a freshman. There's an independent clause. It's a clause because it has a subject and a verb combination. And this is an independent clause because it's a clause that can stand alone as a sentence. Same thing is true if we add to it, she works hard. Again, it's a group of words that has a subject, she, works, verb, a subject-verb combination. And this also could stand alone as a sentence. You could have a sentence that says she works hard. If you want to join these two clauses, and you want to do so with one of those long formal-sounding connectives that we call conjunctive adverbs, however, therefore, and so on, what we do is you say, you insert a semicolon between the two independent clauses. Then you insert your conjunctive adverb, however, put a comma after that, and then add the second independent clause. By the way, please notice I'm talking about joining two independent clauses. I'm not talking clauses. I'm not talking about a sentence like, I, however, was tired. You don't say I, semicolon, however, was tired, because we don't have two independent clauses. I is not an independent clause, and was tired is not an independent clause. We use this formula, independent clause, conjunctive adverb, comma, the semicolon, the conjunctive adverb, the comma, we use that formula between two independent clauses. Susan is a freshman, semicolon, therefore, comma, she works hard. Again, we're talking about how to combine these two independent clauses using one of those long formal sounding words that we call a conjunctive adverb. The next point they give us is, it's a nice idiomatic point that goes toward fluency of expression, and that is the matter of if you've got an auxiliary verb in a verb phrase. A verb phrase is just a verb that also has a helping verb with it, an auxiliary verb. So we might say had agreed, they had agreed to the terms. If you want to use an adverb with that phrase, typically you put it after the first auxiliary verb. So we would say, they had quickly agreed to terms, right? Not they had agreed to terms quickly, or quickly they had agreed to terms. Both of those are grammatically fine, but they're a little awkward idiomatically. They had quickly agreed to terms, I think you'll see, is a bit smoother, a bit more fluent. The next point they make is about relative pronouns. These are pronouns that relate to things that join two different clauses. Pronouns like that or which. Not a pronoun like she, right? But a pronoun like that or which. Those are words that join clauses. I saw the car which I wanted to buy. That which joins those clauses in a particular and determinative way. And so what you want to do is make sure that your a pronoun is always going to refer to a noun. In this case, she refers to Susan, so a pronoun like which is always going to refer back to a noun. And their good advice here is to make sure that your relative pronoun is next to the noun it modifies. In the example they give you, he is a boss who rewards hard work. You want who right next to the word it modifies, boss, right? He is a boss who rewards hard work. Or perhaps a little clearer, this is a major company in our region that is undergoing restructuring. That's an awkward sentence because your relative pronoun that or which is not next to the noun that it modifies, company. This is a company in our region that is undergoing restructuring. What you'd want to say is something like, in our region, this is a company, there's your noun, which or that is undergoing restructuring, so that your that or which will sit right next to its noun, company, if that helps. The next point they make is about appositives. A positive comes when you have a noun or a noun phrase, and then you've got another noun or noun phrase that refers exactly to that one, and then you go on with your sentence. And there are two kinds of appositives, pardon me, at least as in the context that your book is discussing them, and that is positives that are what we call restrictive, that is, the appositive changes the meaning of the sentence, or there are appositives that are non-restrictive. They do not change the meaning of the sentence. If the appositive is non-restrictive, that is, it doesn't affect or change the meaning of the sentence, it's just extra information tossed in that you could probably put in parentheses, then you want to set it off with commas. On the other hand, if it is an appositive that does affect the meaning of the sentence, then you want to not set it off with commas. So, for example, let's say I've got two brothers. Let's say I've got a brother named Thomas and a brother named Lewis. If I say my brother Thomas works for Bell South, right, then I do not want commas there because my brother and Thomas are not perfectly synonymous. I've got two brothers and the word Thomas is specifying which one. So the word Thomas there is necessary, or it does affect the meaning of the sentence because I'm making clear that it's him and not my other brother, if that makes sense. Now, let's assume the case where I have only one brother. In that case, my brother and Thomas are perfectly synonymous. There's no difference at all in meaning between those terms. So in that case, I would say my brother, comma, Thomas, comma, works for Bell South. You could remove Thomas and it wouldn't change the meaning of the sentence. You could put Thomas in parentheses, it wouldn't change the meaning of the sentence. Whereas if I said my brother works for Bell South, that's true in the case of Thomas, it's not true in the case of Lewis. So my brother works for Bell South is not in every case exactly the same thing as my brother Thomas works for Bell South. So in that case, Thomas is necessary to the meaning of the sentence. You would not set it off with commas. Again, you would just say my brother Thomas works for Bell South. But if you had only one, then you would say my brother, comma, Thomas, comma, works for Bell South, because whether or not you include his name, the sentence is still going to be true. My brother works for Bell South is true in every circumstance. Same way as if you said my brother Thomas works for Bell South, because you have only one brother. So keep that in mind. And then finally, for Appendix B, when you use correlative words like not only, but also, or neither nor. You want to make sure that the terms that you place after not only and but also are grammatically similar, because the ideas are grammatically similar. Not only carrots but also peas. These are things that we like to have for dinner, and so you want to keep them both as nouns and both as vegetables if they're joined by a correlative like not only but also. So, for example, we raised, this comes close to the example in your book, we raised not only our market share, but also our profit. Market share and profit, parallel ideas. We did not only this, but also that. So they're similar ideas, and they're exactly the same grammar. We raised not only our market share, but also our profit. Market share being a noun, profit being a noun. Another example where we can use a verb instead of a noun, but make sure you use two verbs. This case, neither nor. We neither sell information nor discuss it with anyone. In this case, what is joined by the neither and nor is a verb, sell, and a verb, discuss. So you want to keep parallel items parallel grammatically. At that point, that more or less takes care of Appendix B. What I want to do now is talk about Appendix C and the last 6 items in Appendix C. The first point they make is, again, a very good one, very simple and easy to absorb. Do not use what we call scare quotes. Your sentences should be well written enough that the words you want to emphasize should stand on their own. Do not use quotation marks for emphasis. He is a team player when you mean that ironically, that he's not a team player at all. In that case, you would say something like, he is not a team player. Just speak plainly and say what you want to say. And you've got some good examples in your book of using the kind of ironic quotes or scare quotes. Essentially, it's just a bad habit. I can't remember when the last time, maybe 30 years ago, did I use scare quotes like that, quotes in an ironic sense. You use quotes when you're quoting somebody. Otherwise, you should tend to stay away from them. You do not need little typographical tricks like quotations, italicize, bold, underline, that kind of thing. Your words should speak for themselves, and if they're arranged properly in a sentence, they will speak for themselves. So you don't need to rely on these lazy tricks of making unusual typographical changes in order to emphasize words. So keep that in mind. The next point they make is about hyphens. Hyphens are frankly a difficult matter. There are complications with hyphens and exceptions to rules and so on. I think the general rhetorical point here is to try not to overuse hyphens. And many times when you might think that you should use hyphens, you want to stay away from them. And they give you examples like anteroom and proactive. Those are words that, however they may have been spelled with hyphens in the past, they're now considered one word without the use of hyphens. There are occasions, however, when you will want hyphens for the sake of clarity. So, for instance, they give you re-hyphen create, that is to create something new, or to create something again, so as to avoid confusion with recreate if you didn't have the hyphen. And another fine example they give you in your book is re-hyphen sign, that is to sign someone up again, or to sign something again. If you omitted the hyphen, then you would have resign, which is a different idea altogether. So in those cases, hyphens would help, but those are pretty rare. Generally speaking, you try to stay away from hyphens and tend to use them, as we mentioned last week, when you've got an adjective that is more than one word, and you want to join those two adjectives together. Again, the big, red car is one thing, but the 4-year-old boy, it's not a 4 boy and a year boy and an old boy, it's a 4-year-old boy. So that phrase 4-year-old you'll join with hyphens. Otherwise, generally best to stay away from them. The next point they make, again, it's fairly simple and straightforward. Here we've used a semicolon and it comes between an independent clause. Generally speaking, this is not entirely the case, but generally speaking, in most of the kinds of sentences you'll be writing, we'll say 90% of the time, this is a 90% accurate rule, semicolons go between independent clauses. Since that's the case, you do not use a semicolon after a salutation. You do not say, dear Michael, when you're writing to your client or you're writing to a boss. You do not say, dear Michael, semicolon, that is dot with a comma underneath it, and then go on your way. You can use a colon for that, but not a semicolon, so be careful about that. Semicolon, virtually every case, goes between two independent clauses. Dear Michael, I'm sorry I was late for the meeting last week. Dear Michael, semicolon, dear Michael is not an independent clause, so don't use a semicolon there. Colon would be perfectly appropriate after a salutation. Point number 10, a little complicated. These are this point deals with what we call M dashes. This is the long dash. By the way, please distinguish a dash from a hyphen. A hyphen is made by striking one hyphen on your keyboard. A dash is made by striking two hyphens right next to one another on a keyboard, and computers will automatically turn that into a dash. Dashes and hyphens are different marks of punctuation, very different marks of punctuation. Hyphens join things. Dashes tend to emphasize. So one place where you would use dashes, you would put them on either side of a particular phrase, and that's a phrase that you could put in parentheses, right? A parenthesis. The old rule of thumb was the parenthesis whispers what the dashes shout. Let's put it that way. So if you've got a phrase that qualifies or adds information, put it within dashes to really emphasize that. Let's say, I need to talk to you, I need to have a discussion with you about Michael. He came late again, dash, for the third time this week. That really emphasizes that you're stressing that point, that it's a chronic situation that happens all the time. Does that make sense? You could also put that in parentheses, that he came late again today for the third time this week, in parentheses. That de-emphasizes it rhetorically. The dash emphasizes the point you're trying to make. And keep that in mind. Dashes are used to add extra information like parentheses, but they're used to stress that information, perhaps more, emphasize it perhaps more than the parentheses do. The next point is a pretty easy point. Between the month and the year, July 2020, or I guess we're now in August 2020, you do not need a comma. There's no point in saying August, comma, 2020, because you can't really confuse the phrase. It's not as if you've got a bunch of numbers running together. August is one thing and 2020 is one thing. So what you write out in letters and what you write out in numbers, two different ideas, and it's easy to distinguish both of them. Where you do want a comma is if you want to separate the date from the year. If you say August 31st, we get paid on August 31st, 2020, you'll want to say August 31, comma, 2020, because there you've got two numbers, 31 and 2020, and if there's no comma there, it may be a bit confused. The reader will have to slow down and make absolutely sure what's going on there. Put a comma there, and you'll see this set of numbers is separate from this set of numbers. This is one idea, this is another idea. So in that case, the comma is a nice help to your reader. But again, there's no point in saying August 20. There's no point in punctuating the phrase August 2020 with a comma. No one's going to confuse August and the numbers 2020. If you use the European way of dating, 31 August 2020, notice that you do not need commas there because the numbers are separated by a word. So again, you can't really confuse numbers and words that easily. And then finally, a somewhat complicated point. They try to simplify it as much as possible. When it comes to nouns, we're not talking about pronouns and possessive pronouns, which never use apostrophes to show possession. But when it comes to nouns, A noun that ends, a singular noun, you should make possessive by using apostrophe S, even if that singular noun ends in S or X or Z, which are essentially the same letter or the same sound. So if a word is a singular noun, and even if it ends in S or X or Z, use apostrophe S, right? So we would say the boss's vacation, right? That's a singular boss, even though it ends in an S. Go ahead and put bosses in that way. So that's the style of there are two different ways actually of showing apostrophe S, and this is one legitimate way. It's a simple way to do it. It's a fairly simple rule to keep in mind. So there you go. That should give you a pretty good overview, quick overview of what they talk about in the second halves of Appendix B and Appendix C. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to email me before you take your quiz. Otherwise, I hope this will shed some light by way of review of what you've read. I hope this will help you as you approach the quiz for this week. And I will be, after I get all those quizzes and grade them, then I'll be in touch with you next week about the actual meat of the course, the beginning to work on things like resumes and business letters and emails and that kind of thing. Once you have the style down and you know how to write good grammatical sentences, then we can actually get to deploying those sentences in official business communication. I'll wait to hear from you if you have questions. Otherwise, I'll be in touch with you about giving you the results of your quizzes. Thanks.